Good morning, everyone. I am jumping in just a second early so that everyone, if they're joining, can see. So I am really excited to be able to share about differentiation today. So there will be a recording. So if people are watching later, it might not be morning. I am responding today to a series of questions that I received about differentiation, and I can see comments in the chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. I'm going to actually open up on another computer. I'm going to open up the Facebook just in case Facebook comments don't come through here. I know the YouTube ones will, but I want to make sure I see the Facebook ones too. So I have 4 questions that I've been asked by a teacher about differentiation, and I'm going to answer those, but I'm also willing to answer anything else. So please feel free to ask away. All right. So the first question was, I have tried to use different lessons for different students based on their readiness, such as math and ELA lessons. And even though you have made suggestions, referring to me, you have made suggestions about preserving the dignity of the students by letting students know that the different assignments are to maintain fairness, I still find that the students are very concerned and self-conscious about being in a different group than their peers. The stigma is undeniable, even though I repeatedly brief students on the need to differentiate the work. Perhaps the issue is that the students at the school where I teach come from very educated and affluent families where the thoughts of being in a lower tiered group is unacceptable. Will you please provide some clarity on this matter? Yes. So I always hate it when I ask a question and someone answers with something completely tangential for 15 minutes, insisting that it's connected to my question, but that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to do it for 15 minutes, but I am going to say something overarching that may not seem like it's a direct answer to this question. The real issue, and it's really the issue that this is an issue for all of the questions that have been submitted. The real heart of this issue is that not enough teachers are differentiating. If everyone were differentiating, this would not even be a question because kids would be used to it. They would be comfortable with it. The issue isn't really how do we as an individual teachers, like how do we as individual teachers in an individual classroom with our individual students, how do we make differentiation understandable to them? The real issue is, why are we even having to do that? Like, why isn't everyone differentiating so that students are used to it? I mean, just imagine, because I really don't think it's that different of a thing. Imagine that a family with a few kids goes to dinner at a restaurant and the parents say to the kids, I don't care what you want to eat. I don't care what you're allergic to. I don't care what nutrients you actually need. All y'all, I live in Texas, all y'all are getting chicken fingers. Like, even though there's lots of things on the menu, you're all going to have to eat the same thing. The kids are not going to agree with that. If the parents say, here's the menu, pick what you want, the kids aren't going to argue, how come he gets spaghetti and I'm getting chicken fingers? It's like, I know that seems like an oversimplification, but truly at the heart of this issue is everything in the world is differentiated. We get very frustrated when people do not allow us to be differentiated. They get upset if we don't have lots of choices, right? I just had to go buy new shoes for walking. And when I went into the Nike outlet, I would have been very upset if I only had the choice between size 9 or size 10 because I wear a 9.5. And so we're used to it in clothing. We're used to it in food. We're used to it in eyeglass prescriptions. We're used to it in the types of houses that we want to live in, the types of books that we want to read, the types of shows that we want to watch, the types of music that we listen to. And some of this is volitional, like some of this is choice, some of this is preference, but some of it isn't, right? Like some of it is due to need, right? I don't just want to have a certain eyeglass prescription. I have severe astigmatism. I need a certain eyeglass prescription. I don't simply want to wear a certain size shoe. I need to wear that different size shoe. It's the one that's right for me. And so I think at the heart of this question and the heart of so many questions and so much pushback against differentiation is this fundamental flaw in our system that says that differentiation is somehow optional, that differentiation is somehow not the norm, but rather the exception. All right, I'll get off my soapbox and answer specifically, what do you do? Well, first of all, students, well, yeah, okay, so even if it is just preference, it's still 100% valid. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we do differentiate for both readiness and interest. So yeah, absolutely, good point. So the next thing that I will actually answer is that kids pick up on our discomfort. So one of the issues when we are first starting to differentiate ourselves, it's not just our default. Then we have the issue that sometimes we feel defensive about it. Like, we know it's right. It's not that we don't think it's right, but we're anticipating the pushback. And then what happens is kids sense that. The psychological term for this is performance monitoring, where you're worried that people are going to accuse you of behaving a certain way. So like, for instance, I talk too much at parties. I know that shocks you all, but I talk too much. Like, not that I get invited to a lot of parties, but if I go to an event, I tend to talk too much. Like, I'm so interested in people. Somebody says something, I'm like, oh, I know, blah, 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 right? And so every time we go to an event, I'm always like, okay, I'm not going to talk too much. But because I am performance monitoring, worried that I'm going to talk too much, I talk too much. And so that happens with us when we're interfacing with our kids. Even subtly, even subconsciously, they're picking up on our own defensiveness about the practice. So Joel says, and if any of you read my email yesterday, this is famous Joel, who recognized that I was cleaning ants out of a windowsill instead of a live stream. I have been trying to convince other teachers, but they're not open to the use of it. So now what? Yeah, teachers aren't open to it for the most part. I don't know if any of you saw the Twitter warfare I got into with a teacher who was saying like that she teaches first grade or kinder and or first grade and kinder. And if they've already mastered putting a period at the end of a sentence, what she's supposed to do, teach them a different punctuation mark. And she was being sarcastic. And I was like, yeah, actually, yeah. How about an interrogation, right? So thank you, Joel. It takes his humble bow. So I would say that in trying to persuade other teachers to differentiation, the key is somewhat like you would persuade someone to a religion, which is you don't. You live it, you live its benefit, and you hope someone asks. So if you as an individual teacher are differentiating and it's having a positive impact in your class, you can share that with other teachers. You can share, wow, I started doing this and I've been shocked at the impact it's had, and let them ask. Unless, as Bernadette is saying, if it's not coming from the top down. So like, for example, in Texas, a teacher really cannot get the highest level of teaching in our teacher appraisal system called T-test. You really can't do it unless you're differentiating. So it has to come from the top down. It has to be an expectation. But I think that Bernadette brings up an important point, which is that it can't just be you will differentiate. There has to be training and there has to be time to do it. All right, so more practical answers to what you were asking about how do you make sure that kids don't feel uncomfortable, don't resent, or there's no stigma created. One of the things is that you can use very clear qualifiers or exit ticket type things to show kids why they need to be in the tier they're in. So they understand, oh, I matched to the level I earned, so that they see clearly it's not just some arbitrary and capricious thing of like, I don't like you. And really that's at the heart of it, right? Kids are worried that being placed somewhere is a sign that you don't value them. The next thing I would say is it's going to be awkward at first. And so you just have to embrace it. You just have to embrace it, that it's going to be awkward, that there's going to be pushback until you get to the point where it's not, until you get to the point where there's not. And I promise you that does happen. The big problem is that even though, okay, so what will happen? I hate it when people start something and then interrupt. So I'll just finish the thought, even though it really belongs better at the end. The big problem is too many teachers give up while it's still awkward. They give up too soon. So the more we do it, the more we differentiate, the more common it becomes in our classroom, the more classroom practice it is, then the more strong experiences they'll have and the less of an issue it will become. The problem, it's just like other teaching practice. It's just like small group instruction, right? When we first start small group instruction, it is the hot mess. Like you are on the hot mess express with small group instruction. But the more you do it, if you just push through, you have to push through. It's anything this is true of, but it's especially true of differentiation if other teachers aren't doing it. The next thing I'd say is allow them to reach up. So like if they want to try to be in, if they want to try to reach a different level of challenge, then I think that you will be less likely to encounter this, right? Like this is the level I've matched you with, but if you would like to reach for another level, then that's perfectly fine too. So those are the ideas that I have about that. Really, the most important ideas in there is, number one, it's too bad you're going alone. It's always going to be harder that way. Number two is persevere. Number three, make sure that they understand clearly why they're being matched to the level they are, the criteria that you used, and also then allow them to reach up. Those are my best tips for that. That's what's worked in my class. Now, and I will say that I do this in my class. So this isn't something I just preach. Like I've used this with real students, and I've taught in elementary and in high school. So, okay, Bernadette says, if you use learning centers, have beginner, intermediate, and advanced options at each station, they could choose which level to attempt. Yeah, I'm a big believer in differentiating centers. Joel's taken my differentiation class, and I talk about differentiating with centers. So he's talked about that. And I think, Bernadette, you bring up a really important point. Hey, Bernadette, you spelled centers the British Commonwealth way. So I'm very curious about where you are. My husband's Australian, so whenever I see Britishisms, I get curious. All right, second. The elephant in the room with differentiating has to do with the fact that all the teacher materials from these are like canned curriculum that they're being given. Benchmark, Advanced ELA Anthologies to Illustrative Math, Eureka Math, Studies Weekly, Brain Pop, Vocabulary, Mystery Science. They have only one assessment for each. You're from Melbourne? Are you there now? It's the middle of the night. On my phone, okay, wait, it just went off. But on my phone, I have the time. I don't know if you could see it. I have the time in where I live and in Sydney, Australia, because my husband is Australian and our family lives there. So I don't want to call them when it's the middle of the night. And so I happen to know it's 2:00 in the morning in Australia. Well, at least in Sydney, it's 2:00 in the morning. So if you're still in Melbourne, welcome. And I have a funny Melbourne story I could tell you. All right. So this canned curriculum only has one assessment for each of the units covered. Although I know to differentiate, I have to create my own tiered assignments and assessments. How can I use, it is 2 a.m., but it's school holidays. Oh, okay. To differentiate, I will have to create my own tiered assignments, assessments. How can I use or incorporate the singular nature of the assessments available on these teacher materials? Okay, I actually don't think this is the problem. The reason I don't think so is that when you're using tiered instruction as opposed to compacted instruction. So when you're using compacted instruction, they're doing something else completely different from everybody else. And so then it might be more of an issue. But when you're using tiered instruction, by definition with tiered instruction, they are working with the same content. Everyone should be mastering the grade level expectation. And so if they're working on the vocabulary words, they should be able to approach the canned assessment without difficulty, because even if they're manipulating the material in a different way, they should still be getting the same material, meaning the same content standards. So in tiered instruction, the standards don't change, just the way that they're manipulating that. So if you have a canned assessment, everyone at the end should still be able to reach that. And then you may also need to evaluate a differentiated product and have them use the assessment provided. So what I'm saying is that there's a difference between assessment and evaluation. So you may have them take the assessment that you need them to take, like that they're forced to take, and then you're going to separately evaluate what they did as a differentiated product, right? So let's say that like all the kids were doing some reading, but they had they were all doing something different to manifest their understanding of that reading, and then they were going to take a test. All right, so let's say they made a brochure, or they made a flyer, or they made a quick PowerPoint, or they recorded a quick video in Flipgrid to show what they learned, or they invented a quiz for it. And then they're all going to take the same assessment that you're given with your CANS curriculum. You can evaluate the thing that they did. You can evaluate the thing that they did without having it be the assessment, right? So I'm going to talk more about evaluation. One of the things I'd say is, what is that assessment looking for? And did they address that? So if so, they're good. So meaning if they addressed it in the activity they were doing, if they address what that assessment is checking for, then you can just use that assessment. It's no problem. If they're not, then you've got compacted instruction, not tiered instruction, which is fine, but that will require a separate evaluation. And I'm gonna come back to this question when I answer question 4, but really I just don't worry that much about the assessment, because if I'm tiering, they should all be able to pass an assessment. If I'm compacting, they would be exempted from that one. Now, what I may do is what I talk about in the course, right? Which is that I might have them take the assessment and put that in as their grade. And then I'm allowing them to move forward, and I might add bonus points to that original grade. And so they took that assessment, the assessment that everybody else is going to have a summative, they'll take as a pre-assessment. And I can use their grade and then add on to it as they learn and grow. And let's see. Oh, and Teacher Makes Sense says that she does that too. Okay, let me catch up with comments, and I see Joel's in just a second. So Wendy's going back to the idea of like that kids get used to the idea of it, right? That it is true. They do it. And then she also says, begin the year with these discussions about equal versus same. I just put that on my Instagram, right? We need to start with that conversation. Okay, so, and then, yeah, that is true. Okay, but Joel says it's not exactly what he meant. He said the students have a quiz based on a reading passage. How do I evaluate that one test? How about using the one assessment as a pre-assessment and then retest the same test? Yeah, so what you get when you do that is a little bit of testing bias. So if I give the exact same test twice in a row, they're going to remember to some extent what was asked. Now, I personally do not have a problem with that in this type of environment. You know, if it's an IQ test, then it's a problem. But if you're looking at just a test that you're using in class, I don't think that's really an issue. So I think that's absolutely fine, Joel. I think you can have your high ability kids take it as a pre-assessment, and then if they're happy with their score, and you know their parents aren't going to have an argument about it, then leave it and let them move on. If they are unhappy with the score, you're unhappy with the score, or you don't feel like their parents will be satisfied that they had a proper learning experience, then you can have them retake it. So that'll work as well. Oh, Christy, that is so nice. You know what? I'm going to do? I made the differentiation course really inexpensive, and that one ran out, but I'm going to do another coupon code for it because I'm talking about it in here. So if you have interest in taking that course, make sure you sign up on my email, and I'll send out a new coupon. That is super sweet to say, Christy. I appreciate it. Okay, so one of the things that we have to make sure is that we're not conflating assessment and evaluation, because that is a problem that I'm going to talk more about later. Okay, question 3. I'm a person who knows that being a teacher takes work and effort. Spending time creating tiered assignments is okay with me, although not for other teachers. However, I think that to say that differentiating does not take extra time and work, as you indicated in your differentiation course, is a bit inaccurate. Perhaps I missed something in the video course about this, and if I did, I would appreciate your clarification on this matter. So I think that this is the nicest way of saying, I think you're full of crap that I have ever heard. So I don't believe you, Lisa. I call you know what, right? All right, so I do stand by what I said. I actually think that differentiating saves time. I believe that I spend less time as a teacher because I provide differentiated instruction. I've written about this on my website where I've actually calculated it out. And I will go in, when we're done with this, I will go in and add a link to that article in the description. But I think it does. I show how I calculate it out. I think the link to it is in the differentiation course where you can watch me create a differentiated lesson. I even have the video of it. I just started taking a screenshot when I was making an actual lesson plan for my real life kids. And I was creating, I think it's a lesson on landforms, and I was differentiating it in real time. And so you can see that, and I calculate out. So, but here's some things to keep in mind. First of all, like anything you do, you get faster with practice. You get to the point where the differentiation really, like the difference between creating a single assignment or a tiered assignment, like a one path assignment versus a tri-path assignment, which as I mentioned in the course, I only believe in tiering 3 levels. I know I've seen some people say up to 5, but I don't agree with that, just because I think that it becomes, the reason I don't believe in 5 is not because I don't think there are at least 5 levels of kids. Of course, if you have 28 kids, you got 28 levels. But the reason I don't want to do 5 is because it becomes much more challenging to get kids in the right tier, and then you get valid pushback. And so I don't do that. Okay, so you get faster. How much time it takes me to do a tri-path instead of a single path is maybe 4 or 5 minutes now for me. Like the different, because I just simply copy and paste, make some changes, copy and paste, make some changes, and I can do it really quickly. Next, sometimes we focus on the time we're spending and not the time we're saving. So it does take more time to create the actual lesson in the first place. And Bernadette's pointing that out, right? Choice boards, tiered tasks, right? Pre-tests, et cetera. That takes extra time. It's front loaded. The time is front loaded, but you're going to save time in some of the other things, because teachers who aren't willing to spend that time are ignoring a key fact, which is that they're spending the time in other ways. They're in parent conferences with parents who are unhappy because their kids are bored. They're in parent conferences or sending a bunch of parent email because a kid is acting out in class because their needs aren't being met. The teacher themselves is spending more time in classroom management, more time in grading. You spend more time when you grade undifferentiated work because you have fewer kids working at the level of their actual optimal work level. And because of that, there's going to have more problems. And as you develop even more skills, you will get value added, because some of the high level kids will start creating assets that you can use. So I find that one of the other benefits of time, one of the other time-saving benefits is that when my highest level kids' needs are met, then that frees up time that I need to work with other students. Whereas if I just expect them to sit quietly and read a book when they're done, or where the work itself is not challenging and they spend most of the day bored, then what happened? And that I did that. I mean, I did that. I did not like spring fully formed from the head of Zeus, like the goddess Athena, as like the goddess of Lisa, goddess of differentiation, right? When I first started teaching, you have no idea. I want to go back and apologize to those kids decades ago who I stood in front of the class and I did not know what I was doing. Like, you are all way better teachers than I was. Like, it is embarrassing to me now. I really feel bad about it. And the fact is that one of the problems that I had, because it took me a number of years to figure out the whole idea of differentiation, was that the problem I had was that I couldn't meet the needs of my on-level students or my struggling students because I had not met the needs of my gifted students. And because of that, I was spending more time trying to defend myself in ARD meetings, which is what we call like IEP meetings. I was spending more time in other things that in the end took more time. So it isn't that I don't think differentiation takes time. What I think is, number one, it's worth it. Leslie says it is what's best for kids. Yes, I do think it is worth it. But number two, I really think that in the end, it saves me time. And I personally, this is just personal preference, I would rather spend my time planning than fixing. And so, because I enjoy planning, I enjoy lesson planning, I enjoy that part. If you're someone who would rather spend time in parent conferences or rather spend time playing whack-a-mole, then I think that is a personal preference, and it is defensible. I mean, you could say, I'd rather do this, but I don't think that in the end, I don't think it takes extra time when you look at it globally. If you look at it just from preparation, 100%, it takes extra time. But if you look at it in the grand overarching amount of time that you spend as a teacher on teaching, and when you calculate the extra time it takes to decompress after a bad day versus a good day, then I think that I can totally defend my statement that differentiation, once you're comfortable with it, and once your students are used to it, and once the parents are trained, then it actually takes less time. I think if somebody told me you can't differentiate anymore, you can only offer a single path, I'd be very, very, very frustrated. Yeah, and Bernadette is confirming, like, yeah, some of the time that you're going to spend isn't really about cognitive, it's about the social emotional side. And yeah, Joel, you know what? I'm really glad you asked this question, because I feel like I probably didn't do a good enough job in the course explaining that you have to look at it in the overarching way, encompassing all of teaching practice, not just the preparation. It definitely does take extra time for preparation, although as you work through it, you start getting faster and faster. All right, question 4. If a student given work in tier 1 does all, and this was my favorite question, by the way, this question is my favorite question. If a student given work in tier 1 does all the questions correctly with easier questions, how can I justify giving that student a high grade when the student with a tier 3 assignment does generally well, but he or she has higher leveled questions? How can I justify giving an A to a student working in tier 1, but a B to a student who worked on more difficult questions in tier 3? The answer to the question is you don't, and I'm going to explain that further. Okay, so the grading question. It's always the grades, right? And I said earlier I was going to come back to grades, so here I am back at grades. So one issue is tiered instruction would rarely be, not rather be, tiered instruction would rarely be a series of questions to be answered correctly or incorrectly. So you're not really going to see that. What you might see is a series of questions where some of the kids have low-level questions and some of the kids have more intense questions. So so you might have that, and I'll address that. But I want to set aside the idea that we might have a bunch of low-level questions that are being asked, and that's all that the assignment is. That's not really going to happen in a tiered assignment. So yeah, you're not just going to give kids a bunch of low-level questions and another kid's a bunch of high-level questions and grade them the same on that. We're not going to do that. Let me explain what we're going to do instead. First is you can make a rubric for different tiers. And in fact, it's very likely that you do, right? Like that, and the rubric may be 90% the same and have one row that's different, right? So you may need to use a different rubric. Next, the grade should reflect what the grade level expectation is. So you grade everyone with the same grade level expectation. And so I think one of the things that I'm so glad that this question was asked, because I think this is a mistake that a lot of teachers make, not even with differentiation, just in general, is that I think too many teachers believe that every assignment every student, like that every student should be trying to achieve an A. Think about what a C really stands for. A C really stands for average. A C stands for average, that you did average work. Unfortunately, we've become a society that believes that the A is like A is normal, B is, oh, sorry, my grandparents are deaf. And so when I'm starting to finger spell. Okay, so that we believe that like the A is what's normal. The A is what, oh, in our family, everybody gets an A, right? And so, okay, I promise I won't. I got to sit on my hands. So everybody gets an A, or a B is bad. B stands for bad. But we need to renormalize C. And I think it's fine to say this level of work is average work. And if you complete it well, you earn a C. We don't have a problem with that with things like posters, right? Like this kind of, if you do a poster that looks like this, it earns a C. If you do a poster like this, it earns a B. If you do a poster that looks like this, it earns an A. And I think that we need to open ourselves up to the idea that responding, especially to open-ended questions, can be that way as well. That there are certain questions that even if they're asked accurately and effectively, are not worth that much. They're like average effort. And so that's another thing. Grades should reflect what the grade level requirement is. So if your high ability students are answering very challenging questions, then you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt in it. Like you're going to give them essentially baseline. Like they're going to start at a certain level because you've pre-assessed them, you know where they belong. They're going to start here and then they're just going to earn from there. So you can ask them a couple of the low-level questions just to get them a few free points if you want. But really what you're doing is saying that you may not have answered this question beautifully. You may not have answered this question completely fully, but for your grade level, you answered this question in something that was above expectation, and that earns an A. And so the important thing becomes making sure that students are graded to grade level expectations. One of the problems is that teachers often take gifted children and they grade them grade levels higher than what they really are. So they'll take a third grader and give them fifth grade level work, which is great, but then they grade them like they're a fifth grader on the fifth grade level work. The only time that's appropriate is if that child has been fully accelerated into fifth grade. But their report card in your grade, and I don't actually know what grade you teach, Joel, but or anyone, I'm not sure of the grade levels here, but if your grade level work is that's what their grade needs to reflect. If you're teaching fifth grade, the report card should reflect how well they worked compared to what you would expect of a fifth grader, not what you would expect of a seventh grader. So feel free to give those kids working at tier 3 the benefit of the doubt. Feel free to give them A's. Like, it doesn't matter, even if there was lots of room for improvement in what they did, if they're working at above grade level expectation, then it's fine. Okay, let's see. If you are teaching all GT, self-contained, or resource room style, that's right. Okay, so either like pull out or you're with, like, everybody in the class is GT. All your students are working, and all your students are working level. Would you still grade based on grade level? Yes. Yes. I would grade, like the grade that goes in the grade book would be based on what a student would be expected to do at that grade level. However, my rubrics would include getting like more, like my rubrics would include space for evaluation above. And so what I will sometimes do is write, I've never talked about this. I've got to do something on this. I've never talked about this. I'm so glad you asked that question. Okay, what I do is if students are working above grade level, the grade that goes in the grade book is based on grade level. The grade that goes on their paper, I will put like, an A +2. And what that, like, or I'll do like A +1, A +6. And I don't mean grade level by then. It means like you fully did this at the level I expected and beyond. And so I will do, I will give them a +2, +4, +5, +6, +2.7. They like decimal points. So +2, you've seen that in my streaming class I do with kids. They like, 3.71264. So I will do that. The key is rubric. The key is evaluation, not grade. The grade that goes in the grade book should be how they are in the grade level. Joel says, how do I justify giving a C to a student who got all the questions correct? You don't. You do, you give that, you say, if they answer all the questions correctly, then you can say answering these questions correctly is worth this. If you want to earn an A, you need to do this much. Like you need to do this as well. But what I really would say is give them all an A. Give them all an A. If they get, the kid who answered level 1 questions all correctly gets an A. The kid, if that's what the grade level is, then they get the A. If the student at the highest tier is answering the questions and they're not all great, but they answered them at a level of grade level expectation, you give that. Yeah, you cannot explain to parents that everyone gets, that if you get all the questions right, you get a C. What you can say is, if you did this, then that was worth a C. So what I would typically do is, if all I have is questions, they're going to be correct or incorrect, then I would typically combine that with something else. And I'm going to keep going on this because I have more answers, and it will probably circle back to that. We're going to fully answer this. This is the last question I have, so we're going to fully answer this. All right. You may wish to give students who achieve beyond that a bonus of some kind. So I already said I do like a +3, but sometimes I might give them like a homework pass, a late work pass, pick a pen, something else. Or you can simply do what I do most of the time, which is to share evaluation in addition to a grade. So like they all get an A that goes in the grade book, but the students who are working at the higher level will get evaluation from me. So an A will go in the grade book, but they'll get evaluation that says to strengthen this. And I've done this. If you've seen any of the live streams that I did during the lockdown last March, where I was teaching language arts online and grading the writing, if you go find one of those early short stories, like The Lottery or The Necklace, go find one of those stories and go to the end. You don't have to watch the whole video. Go to the end and watch how I evaluate their writing. And what you will see is you will see me like show their writing and like to strengthen this is what I will say, like to strengthen this. And so that's what I do for those high ability kids. They're going to get an A in the grade book, which is what they're worried about and what the parents are worried about. But I'm going to give them evaluation on how to strengthen those answers. You can give them, I mean, all you need to do really is give them a scratch and sniff sticker and they'll just do anything for you. But if all of the grade level expectation is met, it's okay to give a kid an A in a grade book, even if the work itself still was lacking in some way, if that work was above grade level expectation. But in general, what I would say is we need to rethink our relationship with grades. We're far too focused on them. What I suggest to all teachers is find out what the minimum number of grades is that is required by your school district and take only that number of grades. Put that number of grades in the grade book. In my school district, it is 12 grades per grading period, which in our district is 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks, every student has to have 12 grades in the grade book. 3 of them have to be test grades, and then there have to be at least 2 quiz grades, and the rest can be daily grades. You can have more test grades and more quiz grades than that if you want, but there have to be at least 3 tests count as, like, and they're all percentages. Like most school districts have rules about it. If your school or school district doesn't have any rules about that, it would surprise me, and you are very, very lucky. And then what I would do if I were you is to only take 10 or 12 grades in a grading period. Here's why. Every grading period, every kid starts out with a perfectly clean slate. And within 2 or 3 grades, they're back to within 2 or 3 points of what they were the grading period before. It turns out that kids go to the level that they are, and they stay there. And so it doesn't matter. You can take 50 grades. The kid is probably not going to get a very different grade than they would have if you'd only taken 10 or 12. So what I do is I will take my grades and I get them out of the way early. I take my required grades and I put them in the gradebook. From then on, work that students do can replace those grades. So once I've got 3 test grades in, if we do something else that counts as a test, then they can replace that grade with that. Otherwise, they're getting evaluation. Now, some people push back against this. Like they'll say, how do you get the kids to do it if they already know that their grades are taken? Well, I don't tell them. I don't tell them that I've already taken the grade. I evaluate everything and return it to them. And I may put it in my gradebook, but I don't count it, right? Like I know what I want. I know what I'm looking for. And what I'm looking for is I want evaluation. I want these kids to know what they did. It's the biggest problem for gifted kids is that they get an A and no feedback. They don't know what they did right. I've written about this in my book on perfectionism, that then they feel like they have to do everything right. And the parents don't know like what they did right. And it's Pat, report cards show grades only. Yeah, that's right. Report cards show grades only. So take your required number of grades, give the kids a grade that reflects how they did on grade level work. How can a teacher or parent look at if one A grade is different type of A grade as another student? Well, that's the limitation of our system. It's the limitation of our system. Did they get an A? Now, the thing is that not all your students are going to get an A. Like they're not all, even if you are using tiered instruction, there's going to be things that they do. They're not going, like, you're probably not going to tier the assessment like multiple choice formal tests. They can look at their grades in the online system. Yep. Yeah. Yep. They can. And they do. And that's fine. The bigger problem is the grades in the online system are not being there, right? That teachers put too many grades in at the end of the grading period. So I feel like in some ways, oh, I just lost my light. My ring light just burned out. I feel like one of the problems is that we're too obsessed with it. And I understand, Joel, the kind of the kind of environment when you're teaching in a high pressure environment, as far as parents having high expectations of their kids for grading, it can be more problematic. But you're right, Joel, there is informal assessment. I think that one of the other things you can do is use portfolios where you allow students to like submit work, you evaluate it, and then they can choose from the work what they want to go in as one of your 10, 12, 14, 16 grades that you're required to take. You can also use a point system. And this, I think, is probably the answer that you might need, is that you can use a point system. So one assignment is worth a certain number of points. That way that students who are doing lower level work have to do more to earn more points. So like if you're going to answer high level questions, I should have had it. I can think right now, particularly of a question a test I have on the Great Gatsby. It's the actual formal assessment. It's the ending test on Great Gatsby. And it has a section. It's like, okay, you need to answer enough questions on this test to earn 80 points. I don't know why I had 80, but that's what I had, 80 points. These type of questions are worth 2 points each. These type of questions are worth 5 points each. These type of questions are worth 10 points each. Answer whatever you want. That's what they're worth. And so my lower level kids would they would stay with those 2-point questions, but they'd have to answer 40 of them. Whereas my kids who had the 10-point questions, they're only doing 8 questions. So they both can earn an A, but it took a lot more, like you had to answer a lot more questions to earn an A doing lower level work. Does that make sense? How that worked? I should have pulled it. I don't have that test on this computer. I'd pull it up. But literally each type of question was worth a different number of points. And so they are answering, they're earning more for harder level stuff. So everybody can earn an A. Everybody should theoretically be working the same amount of time, but it's like how, if I'm answering deep questions, I'm going to have to answer fewer of them. So I knew you would like that. He said, great solution. I knew you would like that. I kept it till the very last. It's actually the very last thing I had taped on my notes to talk about was offer different point solutions. I'm realizing that I need to share that test. I got to find it. I haven't taught Gatsby in a while, but that is something I will do you can do it in daily assignments as well. It's not just for tests. You do it in daily assignments as well, right? So you can do that. All right. So those are my last, yeah, I'll find that test. I'll write a blog post about it, but I'm writing a note here, blog post about Gatsby. I'll use that Gatsby test just because I remember I do it all the time. I do it all the time. It's rare. It's rare that my students don't have choice of what to complete on a test. I don't think enough teachers do that. Like when I think about, have you ever studied for a test? Have you ever studied for a test? Okay, adding grading in more detail in the course. Okay, good. I'll write that down. Good feedback. Add grading in course. I will go in and add some. I think that, oh, that is so cute. Reason number 3,000. Okay, so her son Mark is just a super wonderful kid. He is one of my secret favorites, and I guess it's not secret anymore because it's on YouTube, but he is such a doll. And yes, I wish I were his real life teacher instead of just his online teacher as well. But I just love seeing him. He had a good time last week with the Arthur. I'm kind of surprised he doesn't want to join in the discussion, be like live streaming. But okay, when my students see an assignment, it is very common for them to see. This is something that I think a lot of teachers do in elementary school, where it's essentially like a choice menu. But I do that same thing in tests because we've all had this experience. We've all had this experience of studying for a test, and then you go to take the test and the teacher didn't ask what you studied, right? You did study, you did pay attention, but they're emphasizing it. They're emphasizing different stuff, or they're going into weeds you didn't anticipate. We've all had that experience because we've all been to college. And so I think that one of the things that we have to remember for students is that just because they don't do well on a test doesn't mean that they didn't study, doesn't mean that they didn't learn. It's possible that the way that test was structured didn't match the kind of studying that they did, the kind of recall that they prepared for. And so one of the things that we can do to really help kids be successful is that we can offer choice in the assessment itself. So when I get there, I say, okay, if you want to answer this kind of question, like if you do better with multiple choice, ask this. If you do better with open-ended, you can answer fewer multiple choice if you'll do more of the open-ended, because I will build in the same knowledge in the required response for the open-ended question. Or if you want to write an essay, that will be worth even more, right? Like, so then maybe you only write one essay. So I think one of the things that we can do is more differentiation in the testing itself. And Joel, I am so glad that you asked these questions. I'm so glad that you asked these questions. True story, I was on vacation when I received my first vacation in a year and a half. I was on vacation when I received these questions. And for the rest of the vacation, all I could think about were these questions, because I think these are burning questions. These are questions that lots of teachers have. And I was so grateful that you asked them. I'm actually going to put a link to this video in the course and say, like, somebody who completed this course had these questions, you can go watch the video. But I am going to do what you suggested, and I'm going to write about this on the website, and I'll just add a link to it to read more about grading. So I'm going to write more about differentiated grading. Does anyone, before we wrap up and close, oh, you know what? Well, I'll wait. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or in the comments. And I will tell if Bernadette is still here, I will tell my my Melbourne story. So my youngest son went to college, and he went with his older brother, and so we didn't take him. And when he was moving into his dorm room, his roommate's father was Australian, and the dad was there. And our son said, "Oh, my dad's Australian," and they didn't believe him. And so, oh, good, I'm glad you're still here, Bernadette. So they didn't believe him that his dad was Australian. And so the dad said, "Oh, okay, your dad's Australian." And he wrote a word on a piece of paper and handed it to my son. And he said, "Say that." And my son said, "Melbourne." And he said, "You are Australian." He expected him to say Melbourne. So yeah, my son, fun fact, my son is probably one of the biggest experts on rugby league living in the United States, and the biggest Sydney Roosters fan in the world. We have gone to Australia twice so that he can see State of Origin, because he's a huge Blues fan. Sorry. So anyway, and they were doing pretty well. So, okay, Joel says, can you revisit how to use the one-time end of lesson from the benchmark? Okay, so we talked about a few different ideas from that. So they could use it as a pretest. So you could give it as a pretest, but I think it's fine to give the same assessment to everybody. So what you can do is give one prompt on a piece. Okay, yeah, and I'll talk about that. Okay, can you, so I feel like we answered that you can use that assessment because they all should be able to pass it. You can also use it as a pre-assessment. So I wouldn't worry about using the same assessment unless there's some reason, if you have some reason why they wouldn't. Okay, I'm getting some good questions. So Joel, jump back in and tell me in the comments why you think that that might not work to just have everybody take the same assessment. Even if you're doing different stuff with the material, you can still take the same assessment. And let me answer this because it's a quick question. What he's talking about with that 4-square template is just a frame. Depth and complexity, it's just a frame. It's just an activity. You can do one prompt on a piece. That's fine. You don't need to use a frame. I frequently use and just fun fact, next year's course, so last year I created a course on questioning, this year I created a course on differentiation, next year's course is depth and complexity. But the question, like the frames are popular because they are they're just a common depth and complexity thing. They're a common depth and complexity activity, but they are not required. I frequently will have a frame that uses the same element of depth and complexity in all sections. But frames are not required for depth and complexity. They're just an option. Okay. And Joel says the questions are low level. Okay, why not the questions? Yeah. Okay, the questions are low level assessment. So you can do a couple of things. You can have them take that assessment as the basis, and then you can add on with a value added assessment. But also you can say that their learning experience is what's important to differentiate. The assessment is going to give you how well did they master the required amount of the text. Your only other, and that's okay, the only other option you would have would be to create your own assessment. So you're either stuck with the low-level question assessments, which are cruddy, and I don't like them. And I personally don't use them. I personally create my own assessments. I might use those for a few of my questions, like I'll pull from them, but I don't typically use them, mostly because they don't prepare my kids for anything. I don't like low-level question assessments because they don't prepare my kids for my state assessment. So I usually create my own assessments because I'm trying to prepare my kids for the kinds of questions they're going to see on the state assessment. So I don't usually use the questions that come with the canned thing. But if you're trying to save time, you could do it knowing that they're at least meeting the grade level expectation. Libby asks, what would you suggest is good starting strategy for helping another teacher differentiate lessons, or just looking at their unit plan and making suggestions for differentiations? Okay, but what I start with always, Libby, is environment, because that's the easiest thing to differentiate. So looking at, can they have different materials? So if the students are, because materials are part of the environment. So can the teacher if a teacher is curious about starting differentiation, then I always start with differentiating the environment with like the materials and even looking at the classroom setup and seeing how fun and useful and effective that can be. But looking at differentiating lessons, you can differentiate lessons for content or process or product. And the easiest of those to do is product. So the thing I would look at is helping them see how they could differentiate the product for gifted learners. So maybe most of the kids are producing, something that is lower level, but the gifted kids are producing something qualitatively different from what you would be expecting. So I would start with product. So if most kids are making just like answering questions, can the gifted kids make a quick video about it? Can they make a little tutorial? Can they make a screencast? Can they do something else? Obviously allow any of the kids who want to try it to do that as well, but I would start with differentiating product. That's where I start. Okay, let's see. Then I feel badly because Joel, I know that the answer of the, is not a good one, right? Okay, so yeah, it's basically baseline data. Let's see. Yeah, Bernadette says start small, choose one task in a unit and differentiate that. Yeah, Bernadette brings up an important point here that if we crowdsource it, right? Like you differentiate one part, I'll do another, and then we put it all together, or even like one lesson, right? And then using the frame, students like seeing the big picture. Yeah, I think that's true. Also, the frame gives you that center space to use for graphics. So like if you're teaching something that has a cycle or something like that, it's really good. Can I use the link of this course as a PD for faculty school? Do you mean this video right now? Yes. If you mean the differentiation course, no. Okay. Oh, thank you, Joel. But I will tell you, LA is going to make that differentiation course available. So teachers will be able to get it. Okay. I think that may be all the questions. I want to thank you guys so much for participating at your school. No, the course link is individual. It's an individual one, but I believe that LA is considering making it available to teachers. So yeah, the course is just for you. I want to thank you guys so much for participating. I can't believe that you would take time out of your day, and I'm so honored. I'm so grateful. I've just started, if you're on Instagram, I've just started on Instagram at, yeah, the YouTube video, go ahead and share with anybody. It's going to be on YouTube. It's on Facebook. You can absolutely share it for sure. Absolutely. And I've recorded a couple of other live stream Q&A kind of things, like one specifically looking at sharing books with kids, like how I do that, like how I prepare to teach a story. And then also another one that's just Q&A. And I am trying to do these like once a month or so. And those are all available. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to send them in to me at any time. I love answering them. And thank you again so much for participating. And thank you, Teacher Likes Books. And thanks for having such a great kid. If he's ever missing someday, you know who stole him. So I will sign off. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. And thank you so, so much to everyone tuning in, but especially Bernadette at 2 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne and helping me feel my Aussie family home. So thank you very much. You guys all have a wonderful day. Bye.